And so when I dove into the science on VO2 max, I started to realize, look, not only is this something that I need to pay attention to for improving jiu-jitsu performance, but it's also key for longevity. One of the biggest keys. Like, you can do everything else, but if you don't do this, it's a problem. You're gonna have a problem if you don't do this. I'm gonna have a problem if I don't do this. And when I say do this, I mean boost your VO2 max.
Welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast, where it's all about taking control of your health, losing fat, transforming your body, and living the life you deserve with celebrity fitness trainer and longevity enthusiast, Ted Rice. I'm 46 years old right now. I'm going to be 47 on February 2nd of 2024. And if you're like me, you're in your 40s or perhaps your 50s, and you're wondering, okay, I'm starting to feel this age thing. What can I do to get a leg up on this aging process? How can I look, feel, and perform my best despite the fact that I can't stop time from marching on? And today, if you're wondering, well, what is there? What is the 80-20 of health and fitness, especially for longevity? We're going to dive into one of those things today. It's called your VO2 max. It's something that is just beginning to be talked about in the, let's say, the mainstream fitness space, and you're only going to hear more about it. And the reason is that it's arguably the strongest predictor of how well you're going to age, how well you're going to handle diseases or avoid diseases. And in this episode today, I'm going to talk about what VO2 max is and what the best ways are to improve it. But most importantly, we're going to be talking about some protocols and some things to do. But I've been playing around with this stuff for a long time. I'm going to give some insights from my years of coaching clients and also doing this myself. So you're going to want to listen all the way to the end. I'm going to have that part at the end. So again, if you're into longevity, this episode is for you. And welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast. I'm your host, Ted Rice, health expert and coach to executives, entrepreneurs, and other high-performing professionals. And we produce this show for two reasons. Number one, I've been in this business for almost a quarter of a century now. Seen a lot of things come and go, and I want to save you from going down some of the dead ends that I went down in the past 25 years, which was unfortunately a lot. And the second thing is, if you are a high performer and you're looking to get the same results with your health that you've had in your business or with your career, and you know coaching is the way to do it, you'll know whether or not I'm the right coach for you. So let's dive in. VO2 max, it was something that was talked about in the context of endurance training. So if you were an endurance athlete, it was something that was important. But it isn't just for endurance athletes. It's a critical health marker that you should check arguably every single year. And I'll say it like this. I'll be straight with you. It is absolutely crazy that VO2 max testing isn't a standard part of health assessments when you go to the doctor for a checkup. It's crazy. They'll take your blood pressure, take your resting pulse, and all those things are important. That said, VO2 max is one of those things. I read a paper that said it's the strongest marker of longevity. It didn't say longevity. It used really sciencey talk about like how it's the strongest predictor of avoiding or improving or lowering your risk of all-cause mortality or something like that. So we know that cardiorespiratory fitness, which I'm going to say that's the proper term. We talk about cardiovascular, but that's a bit redundant. Cardiorespiratory talks about your vascular system, but also your lungs, because that is one of the important keys here. So it's strongly associated with a long, healthy life. And low levels of cardiorespiratory fitness or cardio is associated with an increased risk of all-cause mortality, which is death from, a lot of different things, cardiovascular diseases, that makes sense, and even cancer. Not only that, But improving your cardio can significantly reduce the risk of developing chronic conditions like dementia, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. And in the fitness industry, we often focus on workouts for fat loss or body sculpting, but VO2 max goes beyond these. It's about your body's ability to effectively use oxygen. So that's pretty fundamental. You can go, a few weeks without food, a few days without water, but how long can you go without oxygen? Not very long. About 2 minutes, I believe, and you start to get brain damage. Anyway, I want to share why I'm currently obsessed with VO2 max right now. 2 things happened to me. One thing is that I got sick, not once, but twice last September in 2023. It sucked. And what's worse is that I was in great shape at the time, so I thought. And I was sure while everyone else was getting sick, I was exercising, my body fat was low, I was performing well in the gym, I was sleeping well, tracking my sleep stats with Aura, taking a bunch of supplements that I was trying for health optimization, but I still got knocked on my ass twice. And that got me thinking, if I'm in such great shape now, eating well, taking all these supplements, what else can I do? What else is left to do to optimize my health to stop this from ever happening again? The second time wasn't that big of a deal. The second time I got sick in September wasn't that big of a deal. But the fact that it happened twice really made me think about my life, really think about what the hell is going on. But the first time it kicked my butt and it got into my lungs, it messed me up. And I was taking these supplements that were supposed to help fight off infections, respiratory infections, mucolytic supplement. I was taking all this stuff, right? And I was taking the standard, everything that you can think of, the ginger, the garlic, the zinc, the vitamin C, the N-acetylcysteine. I was taking so much stuff. And it just didn't seem to make that much of a difference. And I was quite shocked. I was like, okay, I need to figure out what can I do here? I never want this to happen to me again. Or if it does when I'm 80, at least it's not going to happen to me in my 40s and 50s when I feel like I'm in top shape. And what I found out was that I wasn't as in great shape as I thought. I'm in pretty good cardiovascular shape, or was in pretty good cardiovascular shape at the time. But, and we're going to talk about this later when we're discussing protocols for boosting your VO2 max, I wasn't in as great a shape as I thought. I looked great. My strength was good. Again, performing well in the gym on resistance training. And if you listen to this podcast, you know I talk a lot about the importance of resistance training. And you also have heard me talk about zone 2 cardio, which I was doing as well. So again, we're going to get into the whole zone 2 thing a bit later and why it's not the best way to train your VO2 max, according to science. I know it sounds like clickbait, right? But it's true. So I dove into the research, and what I found out was that VO2 max strongly affects the seriousness of things like the flu, pneumonia, COVID-19. And you know, I don't get political on this show, but I will say this: one of the things that came out of the whole COVID-19 thing, and some of the research on it, with what it does to your lungs and your heart and all that, it's like the people who had the lowest cardiorespiratory fitness had the worst symptoms, had the worst. It was more intense, worse for people with low cardiovascular fitness. And the thing is, now I had COVID. It wasn't that big of a deal. Had no idea what I got sick with this time around and didn't bother testing it. But what I would say, it's like, you know, it is just, it's like I don't want to say a crime. That's too strong of a statement, but it's crazy. Like I said earlier, that this isn't being talked about by the media, by mainstream medicine. Now, I did get some of this from mainstream medicine, but they're the people who published the papers. It wasn't, the people who we deal with, doctors, aren't talking about this stuff, right? So I also want to point out that, remember my recent series where I said nutrition comes nowhere close to exercise when we're talking about impacts on health? this is another example of it. You can't eat your way into a high VO2 max. You can't also lift your way into a high VO2 max. So that was the first thing that happened. And the second thing that happened is I've recently gotten back into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For those of you who don't know, I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 18 years, on and off due to injuries. I'm a brown belt, have 2 stripes, so close to my black belt. It's crazy that I don't have it. But of course, I don't deserve it because I haven't put in all the work. And what I mean is crazy. It's like I keep getting close and then having to stop due to injuries and sometimes inconvenience. So I made it a point in 2024, I'm going to get my black belt. And I started in 2023, and I guess the middle of the year, started training in Brazil. And I've been running out of gas during hard training, especially recently after I got sick. And I'm in this new school where they really push the pace. And let me tell you, maybe you can relate if you've been chasing after your kids and you get out of breath and you're like, whoa, my kid's still running and I needed to take a rest for a second. That's something I've heard a lot from some of our clients who are new parents. But nothing makes me, I don't have kids yet, but nothing makes me feel old like being in jiu-jitsu class and just feel like, man, my technique is good, but I ain't getting crushed right now. I can barely breathe. I feel like I might have a heart attack, even though I know that's not going to happen. It's terrible. And so I was like, I cannot deal with this. I have to make a change. And so when I dove into the science on VO2 max, I started to realize, look, not only is this something that I need to pay attention to for improving jiu-jitsu performance, but it's also key for longevity. One of the biggest keys. Like you can do everything else, but if you don't do this, it's a problem. You're going to have a problem if you don't do this. I'm going to have a problem if I don't do this. And when I say do this, I mean boost your VO2 max. So let's get into some things that I think are really important to know about VO2 max, how to test it, and of course, how to train it. So as we age, some things are inevitable. Our hair turns gray, or if you see pictures of me, falls out in my case, our skin gets weird. But the great news is that, yeah, some of those things we just can't change. They're inevitable. But when it comes to our strength, our muscle mass, our body fat percentage, and yes, our cardiorespiratory fitness, we have a lot of control. There is a bit of bad news with the VO2 max thing. The current consensus among scientists is that regardless if you're an elite endurance athlete or someone who's never gotten off the couch, except to, if you're a couch potato, your VO2 max is going to decline. Even if you train, even if you show up, even if you never skip a week of training, it declines. What's crucial here is that although a decline in our cardiorespiratory fitness may be inevitable, the current science shows that the higher you build your VO2 max when you're younger, you can give yourself a big head start. For example, if you check out the show notes to this episode, I've included a graphic and I'm looking at it right now. It shows how lifelong endurance athletes, they have a much higher VO2 max than other people, to the point where you can be a 70-year-old with a higher VO2 max than a 25-year-old sedentary person. So let me restate that. If you're an endurance athlete, you can have a higher VO2 max at 70 years old than a sedentary 25-year-old. Think about that. This is huge. This is huge. And if you're not someone who's been active in the past, or especially a lifelong endurance athlete, I'm not, it doesn't mean you should give up if you're over 40 and don't have that history of endurance exercise. In fact, there's great news for you too. While you may not be able to build that elite level VO2 max now, you're still in a great position to increase it. In fact, the more out of shape you are, the bigger the gains that you're going to get. It's kind of like when someone first goes into the gym, or when I get a client who is out of shape and they're thinking, oh, it's going to take so long to get back in shape. It really doesn't with the right program. You build, the bad news is you're out of shape. You're like years behind on your workouts. The good news is that you're going to build muscle so much faster than I will. You're going to make changes so much faster than I will, and other people who are trained. So keep that in mind. Said another way, it'll take you minimal time and effort to increase your VO2 max versus someone who is an athlete you're going to have to put in serious time and effort if you're an athlete. And even me, I don't have a low VO2 max, but I'm going to have to, it's not that, oh, I'm getting confused here. Sorry. I don't have a low VO2 max, but it's not high either. However, I'm still going to have to work kind of hard to boost it. So let's talk about the best place to start. So hopefully I have you pumped up about this idea of VO2 max. And I'll even say this, ever since I started training to improve it, I feel so much better. Even then when I told you I felt like I was in top shape. What I meant I was in top shape, I meant I felt strong, but I wasn't in great endurance shape. I wasn't, let's say, top level with my endurance, top shape with my endurance compared to my endurance, right? How I've been, let's say, in my 30s. And since I've started doing this, my mind is sharper, my energy levels are higher. It's really, really, you can start to feel like, whoa, I'm reversing the clock here a bit. So let's talk about how to test it, because that's the best place. Having a test, it gives you a baseline measurement to assess where you are now and how effective your training is. So testing VO2 max can be done in various ways. The gold standard is to go into a lab and test it on a treadmill or cycle or ergometer. And it's going to run you somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 US dollars. And listen, I highly recommend this, as there's nothing like having an expert to take you through the proper testing protocol. I've been outside of the country. I've been in Mexico for the past couple months. I've looked at VO2 max testing facilities here. There aren't any. It's even hard to find an MRI where I am. So I'm planning on going back to the States when I figure out my itinerary here, either to the States or somewhere else, and getting that test done. Highly recommend that. If you're doing well in life, you want to have an expert take you through a proper testing protocol, because when you just try to do things on our own, we often miss out due to a lack of experience. We maybe don't push ourselves hard enough, or something else happens. We didn't do it properly, but we think we did, but because we don't know any better. So going and getting that VO2 max test in a lab, that's going to be the best bet. However, I wanted to share a couple others, because if you're like me, you can't do it yet. There's the Cooper test, which is a 12-minute run for maximum distance. In other words, you warm yourself up and then you try to cover as much distance as you can in 12 minutes. Doesn't matter how you do it. Do you run at a steady pace? Do you run intervals? Do you run walk? Doesn't matter. You just try to cover as much distance as possible in 12 minutes. And that'll give you a good idea of where your VO2 max is. Now, to score it, you're going to have to look it up online and how to do it, how to score it. But it's something worth, if you can't go and do a lab test, again, which I highly recommend, it'll probably even give you insight into how to do it, the 12-minute Cooper test. So definitely do that. But if you can and you're just dying to do something, a Cooper test is something that you can do, especially if you're a runner. I'm not. My knees don't like running. I haven't tried the Cooper test yet, but I have had my clients do it. And it is something that is, let's say, research backed. Now, if you have an injury or if you're sedentary, then the Rockport walking test is probably the best place to start. So again, search that up, how to do it and how to calculate your score, because you can find a calculator, but you need a few things. You need to know what data you need to give the calculator to do it. So look that up and make it happen. And that's going to give you your foundational place to start, your test that you can retest, because we want to retest. Just like if you were in the gym and lifting weights, and let's say, well, I can squat 205 and I can bench press 185. or whatever you're doing, 315 or 450 or whatever. And you have that test, you know what you can do and you can see the improvement. Cardio is a little bit more tricky because unless you're using some apps, and this is new to me, I'm not an endurance athlete. I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I don't wear things while I'm doing jiu-jitsu because it wouldn't stay on. So the point is, like, I'm learning about this stuff myself. I'm actually consulting with someone to help me out to understand it better and to create a program for Brazilian jiu-jitsu that makes sense. However, this is a good place to start knowing your score and then having something to evaluate it against. Just like if you're in the gym, okay, are you lifting more than what you did a month ago, 2 months ago? So let's talk about the thing that you really want to know is, what is the best way to train your VO2 max? That's what you really want to know, right? I mean, that would be the thing that I want to know. So I know you want to know how to improve this VO2 max thing we've talked so much about. And I want to say, just by starting out, when I first learned about VO2 max and endurance training, again, I got into this when I hit the wall in my early 30s, training in jiu-jitsu. I'm not going to go through the whole story and share the whole drama with you, but I learned that during that time, it was about, I needed to do more zone 2 cardio. And right now, you'll hear so many people talking about, you got to do zone 2 cardio for longevity. And the thing that I understand right now is that the zone 2 cardio is what's being promoted as the best way to boost your VO2 max, because it isn't about how much zone 2 cardio you do. It's about this thing called VO2 max this metric called VO2 max that we're trying to influence, that we're trying to increase. And if you listen to, again, Peter Attia, really appreciate him, talks about zone 2 a lot. However, a lot of what's being said isn't the right way to boost your VO2 max. And that's not me saying this. For example, there was a 2015 systematic review and meta-analysis in the Journal of Sports Medicine that showed while both moderate, so long, slow distance running, the zone 2 in other words, and high intensity interval training, both improved VO2 max, high intensity was the clear winner. And what the paper said, to quote, endurance training and HIT both elicit large improvements in the VO2 max of healthy young to middle-aged adults, with gains in VO2 max being greater following the HIT when compared with endurance training. And then there's another paper that changed things for me, was this 2007 paper entitled Aerobic High-Intensity Intervals Improve VO2 Max More Than Moderate Training. And what they did in this one was they compared, they got 40 people, so 40 healthy, non-smoking, moderately trained male subjects. Not sure what moderately trained means, but they randomly assigned them to 4 groups. One was long, slow distance running. So we're talking about a 45-minute run at roughly 70% of maximum heart rate. The second is something called a lactate threshold run. So it's a 24 to 25-minute run at 85% of your max heart rate. So if you think of that long, slow distance run where you're like, I can keep a conversation going, lactate threshold running, it's pretty tough. You're out of breath the entire time, very hard to talk. And then the third protocol was the 15-15 interval protocol, where you would do 47 repetitions of 15 seconds of running in this case, but it could be cycling. In this study, they used running at 90 to 95% of their heart rate max, with 15 seconds of active rest between each interval. So 15 seconds of running as hard as you can, 15 seconds of walking, 15 seconds of running, 15 seconds of walking, and doing that 47 times. The last one was the 4x4 protocol. And this is something, if you're already a listener of the show, you've heard me talk about, you might have heard other people discuss it. And what this is 4 repetitions of 4-minute intervals at 90 to 95% heart rate max, with 3 minutes of active rest between each interval. So think running as hard as you can for 4 minutes, not And when I say running as hard as you can, I mean like we'll talk about this when I get to the insights, my coaching insights. But we're talking about not, oh yeah, I run for 4 minutes and walk for 4 minutes. No, you are staring at your watch and you're just counting down the seconds. When does this hell end? Type of running. Okay. And then walking for 3 minutes and doing that 4 times. And get this, each interval protocol was performed 3 times per week for 8 weeks. And the results, 4x4 outperformed everything. It raised VO2 max by 8.8%. Coming in second was the 15-15 intervals with a 6.4 increase. And here's the other thing. The lactate threshold came in third. And then the long, slow distance running came in last. So the lactate threshold, it was like a insignificant 2%, not insignificant, but very uninspiring 2% increase. And then the long, slow distance running came in last with a 1.8% increase. So one thing's clear based on the data that we have, longer, harder intervals are best for boosting your VO2 max. And the best thing you can do here, if you just wanted to go straight to boosting your VO2 max, would be something like the 4x4 protocol. And I also want to give a special shout out to Brady Holmer, whose book on Amazon, VO2 Max Essentials, the comprehensive guide to aerobic fitness, how to improve it, and what it means for health, performance, and longevity. I had a conversation with him on the podcast. You definitely want to hear that. And if you want to dive deep into VO2 Max, definitely get his book on Amazon. It's very easy to read, very short, easy to read, not very short, but it's the appropriate length. It's not super long like a textbook. It's a good read. It's to the point. It leaves some things out, like how do you structure a running lifting program, or how do you create a program to boost your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu performance if you happen to be interested in such a thing. However, if you're just looking to boost your VO2 max to understand it better, definitely get his book. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my coaching insights from 25 years, almost 25 years, not quite, but almost there, a few months away, from a quarter of a century of coaching. I want to tell you a couple things. I've been into the VO2 max thing for a while. I had a client last year, actually. I got them into the VO2 max. What I would typically do is say, hey, listen, you want to do this 4x4 protocol for the VO2 max because I have another paper on cycling that shows that 4x8 intervals, so 8-minute long intervals, are even better for boosting VO2 max than 4x4. But what I would start people is on the 4x4 protocol. And my client, because he was interested specifically as a history of heart disease in the family, wants to boost his VO2 max, super important. I gave him this 4x4 protocol. He's like, he didn't say this, but the vibe was, you know what? Maybe dying young or younger isn't such a bad thing if I'm going to hate my life doing these protocols. Because they are, the 4x4, if you're just jumping into it, it is brutal. If you're not already in great cardiovascular shape, and even if you are, it's brutal. So what I'd recommend doing is starting out with zone 2 cardio a couple times a week. Like, let's say you were going to do 3 times a week, cardio 3 times a week. I would say, hey, do 2 zone 2 cardios and then do 1 interval training. And when you do the interval training, maybe start with 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. Do not start with 4 minutes. It's really brutal to do this. And of course, if you're hard-headed, you got to learn from experience. Go ahead, give it a try. And then make sure to tell me you were right, Ted. That was terrible. I could only do 1 of them, and then I had to lay on the ground for like 4 minutes. Or tell me, oh, it wasn't that hard at all because you didn't do it right, because you weren't pushing yourself. Because if you do this properly, you want it to end. So start off with something like a 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. You want to build from there, then do like a 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, and then maybe a 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, then maybe a 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, and then boost it up to 4, and do that do that over weeks' time. There's no need to jump into a protocol like this, a 4x4 protocol, or again, the 4x8 protocol, which was what I was doing, because I'm like, okay, 4x8 outperforms 4x4. I guess I'm doing 8 minutes. That's what I would give my client. And what I told them to do, by the way, in the past is just do the 8 minutes on and then rest for 2 minutes, because that's what the 4 times 8 is. It's 8 minutes on, 2 minutes rest. So push yourself for that 8 minutes, but don't go as hard as you can when you first start, and just work your way up. But I've changed my thinking on that now. I'd rather you go hard for a shorter period of time, like 15 seconds to 30 seconds, and then increase that time over time. So, and what I've found is that the way I used to do it, we're giving someone like a 4x4 or 4x8 and then just telling them, hey, go slow, and then slowly, increase the intensity over time. People just don't push themselves hard enough. Versus where you're only going to do 15 seconds or 30 seconds. I think 30 is a good place to start. Where you're doing 30 seconds on, you really can go all out, because you got 90 seconds after. And I want to say something else. These 30-90s, 4x4, 4x8, 15-15, all of this stuff is arbitrary. We don't know, like, can you do different intervals in the same workout? For example, let's say this is what happened to me recently. I went hard on my first intervals, and then I felt like, man, I can't do that again. I went hard, meaning, let's say I did like, I think it was 2.5 minutes of a sled push. I hadn't been doing sled pushes. My cousin got a sled, not a snow sled, but a sled, an exercise sled, a weighted sled. And I'd push the thing for 2.5 minutes or maybe even 3 minutes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to keep the intervals to 1 minute right now. 2 minutes is just way too long, or 2 minutes and change, way too long. So I started out with that longer interval, then I dropped it. And what we know is this, and this is, again, shout out to Brady, because what he was saying is you can come up with any intervals you want, but a few things. Number one is you want the intervals to be, you want to work up to doing these longer intervals of at least 2 minutes. You don't have to start with them, but eventually you want to work up to having these 2-minute intervals or more. And what we're looking for is a total time of around a minimum of 15 minutes. Now, I say a minimum, but I don't want you to think, oh, that means I have to get a minimum of 15 minutes of high intensity work. So let me go and do this 30 on, 90 off that Ted is talking about. And I want to do that until I get a total of 15 minutes of work. You don't have to, but let's say like that's the entry point, right? That's where you want to get to, where you're in the zone. You're not a beginner anymore when you're doing that. And we want to work on getting the work to rest ratio down. So we want higher work, lower rest. So recently, I'll use another personal example here. When my cousin got the sled, we were all pushing it down his street, and I was taking turns with my family. It was a family affair out there. My cousin, we even got his wife, his 2 sons out there, and we were all pushing the sled and taking turns. And because there were so many people, my rest was, one time it was 10 minutes, another time it was 6 minutes. But you want to get your rest down. Again, you can do what I did initially. You want to rest. You don't want to kill yourself here. I've done interval training. I remember I did the 30-90s. 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. I remember the first time I did it, I did 7 of them because that was the protocol. And then I spent about 10 minutes laying down on the gym floor on a mat because I was so exhausted. That is what you want to avoid. And, in my defense, I'm still learning how to do cardio properly. And now I'm better than I've ever been. And so I avoid those, but you want to avoid feeling like you just crushed yourself. You also want to avoid feeling any twinges in any joints or muscles. I had a client who was doing the 4x4s on a treadmill. she felt a little twinge in her hip flexor and stopped. I said, yes, exactly. You feel a twinge in a muscle, you stop. Because remember, as soon as you stop doing this, or now don't remember, I haven't talked about this, something I can talk about later, but as soon as you stop training, you start to lose VO2 max. You lose conditioning quite fast. So you definitely want to avoid injuring yourself, because then you have to stop training and weeks of work go down the drain. So those are a few things to keep in mind. And listen, I also want to say this in wrapping up here. We are in a bad state as a society in so many ways. And the way I focus on is helping you to increase your conditioning. I really think I'm a fat loss coach. I help you get the body of your dreams, blah, 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 right? But what I truly believe is a lot of what we're dealing with, the mental health, the physical health, people are just so out of shape. And I don't mean people are too overweight or have too much body fat. That's a problem too. But I would argue if you are someone and you don't want to change your diet, but you want to be healthier, get exercising. Exercise is so powerful. And when you do it the right way and boost your muscle mass and you boost your VO2 max with the right types of training, you just get in better shape. You feel better. Your mind is sharper. You're less depressed, less anxious, lower levels of inflammation. And this is at any age here. So if you've been struggling with mental sharpness, with anxiety or depressive feelings, I'm not talking about full-on clinical anxiety disorder or depression here, just like, feeling overwhelmed, whatever it is, make it a point to focus on this and see if you notice a change. And just understand, it doesn't change anything in the outside world, but it changes your internal world, your inside world, the way that your physiology is. And that is such a huge part of what makes up not just how we feel in general, but also our resilience to stress in the outside world. So let's make a commitment, not just to focus on weight or fat loss, but on boosting our health in ways that we know matter, that we know will give us that healthier, dare I say, legendary life. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed it. If this hit home for you, what I want you to do, share it with someone who needs to hear this. If someone is out of shape, or perhaps they're in great shape in a way because they lift all the time, but they get winded walking up a couple flights of stairs, give this to them and see if it can't make a difference. Hope you're having an amazing week, and I'll speak to you soon. Now, I want to talk about Friday, where I'm going to be going into how to break up with your bad habits. I mean, we've all experienced this, whether we failed at our latest diet or felt the pull to refresh our Instagram feed instead of making progress on a work project that is past due. We all have bad habits that can sabotage our work or slow us down or make us feel bad about ourselves because we feel a bit out of control. But the issue is, why is it so hard to take back control of our lives when we're clear about what we want to achieve and what's in the way of doing it? So to find out the answer to this question and more, tune in on Friday. I'm going to talk about how to break up with your bad habits. I'll speak to you then.
That's a wrap on today's episode, folks. We truly hope that you found immense value in our discussions and that these insights will help propel you to that next level of health, regardless of where you are right now. And if you know someone who could benefit from listening to this episode, perhaps a fellow high achiever or driven professional in your network, do us a favor and share it with them. You never know how much of an impact these conversations can have on someone's life and success. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Legendary Life Podcast. We're on a mission to help you reach your fullest potential, and your support means the world to us. So until next time, stay ambitious, stay focused, and keep crushing your health goals.